All right, let's jump into another deep dive and get ready because this one is a really heavy one. It's a truly terrifying story of survival. We're going to be looking into this ordeal that happened over in England. So, one of those gives us that initial shock, right? And the other one really lets us hear it from the victim herself, which I always think is, it always adds another layer to it when you hear it from that perspective.
Yeah, and what's fascinating to me about this whole case is that we see these horrific events in the news all the time, but these videos really allow us to kind of go a step further and explore the lives of the people involved, right?
Absolutely. So to kind of set the scene, this story starts with Marcin and Melina. They meet in Poland, they fall in love, and they decide to kind of start this new life together in England, and they even have a son together. So at the start, it sounds like the perfect life.
It does. It sounds very idyllic. But there's this real shift that happens, and it starts with Marcin. He develops this obsession with the gym. He starts using steroids, and his personality just takes a turn for the worse. Going from being this loving partner, he becomes really volatile and abusive.
Yeah, it's almost like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, right?
Yep.
Where it's just a sudden change in personality. I mean, at what point do those warning signs become apparent?
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? With abusive relationships, it often starts very subtly. Maybe that's some controlling behavior, trying to isolate their partner from friends and family. It could even be something as seemingly harmless as intense workout routine.
Right.
But the thing is, those seemingly small things can escalate into something much more dangerous.
Yeah, and for Melina, she does eventually reach her breaking point. She decides to leave Marcin and go back to Poland with their son. And you can only imagine the courage it must have taken to make that decision, especially knowing how volatile he had become.
Oh, absolutely. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the most dangerous times for a victim. And for Marcin, he's driven by his own fears and this need for control. And he just can't accept her leaving. So he becomes obsessed with the idea that he's going to lose custody of his son.
And that's when things take a very dark turn. He gets his friend, Patrick, involved. And together, they come up with this plan to get rid of Melina for good. And to kind of lull her into this false sense of security, they stage a shopping trip, which, is just heartbreaking because you can sense from her perspective that she has this little bit of hope that maybe things can work out.
Yeah, she even puts on her engagement ring for the shopping trip, right?
Right.
It's like clinging on to that symbol of happier times. And it just goes to show how manipulative Marcin was using that against her.
It's really chilling, the level of premeditation involved. And, instead of going shopping, she walks into an ambush Marcin, along with Patrick, attack her right in the hallway. They use a stun gun to repeatedly shock her, they bind her, gag her, and then they force her into this large cardboard box. I can't even imagine the terror that she must have been going through.
And this wasn't something they decided on the spur of the moment. They had already dug a grave. They got the stun gun, the things to restrain her. The planning is it's horrifying.
And then they drive her out to this remote wooded area. They bury her alive. And you can almost hear the weight of that dirt hitting the box as they're filling in the grave.
Yeah, and to make it even worse, they put this heavy tree branch on top, to make absolutely sure she couldn't escape.
It's as if they wanted to make her suffer, make sure she felt the full weight of their actions, But what they didn't count on was Melina's incredible will to survive.
And that's where the story takes this really remarkable turn, Despite the terror, the darkness, being buried alive, she fights back.
It's really hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? You're trapped in this box, underground, completely dark. And the weight of the earth, it's gotta be terrifying.
Oh, it's unimaginable. And the sensory deprivation alone would be enough, right? But then you add in the trauma of the whole situation. Like the betrayal by someone she loved, the shock of the attack, the fear that this is it,
It's like something out of a nightmare, you know what I mean? But she finds a way to fight back. It's pretty incredible. She actually manages to use her engagement ring, that symbol of their love, to cut the tape that's binding her wrists.
Which, that speaks to her resourcefulness, to be able to think that clearly under such incredible pressure. It's like, where does that strength come from? How do people endure something like that and not just survive, but actually resist?
Yeah, that's a question that always comes up for me when I look at these cases. In Melina's statement, she actually says that it was the thought of her son that gave her the strength to keep fighting, that motherly instinct to protect her child.
Yeah, that primal instinct to protect your child, right. That's incredibly powerful, even in the face of something so terrifying. And, it's important to remember that this isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of enduring trauma. I mean, Melina talks about having nightmares, about the fear that Marcin will come back to finish what he started.
It really makes you think about how survival isn't just about escaping, it's about dealing with the psychological scars, the fear, the anxiety that can stick with you long after.
Exactly. And, that brings us to the question of resilience, doesn't it? What is it that allows some people to go through something so horrific and emerge, maybe not completely unscathed, but still standing? And how can we as individuals, as a society, support survivors in their journey towards healing?
Yeah, these are questions that we all need to be thinking about, right? And in terms of the legal outcome, both Marcin and Patrick were arrested and convicted. Marcin received 20 years for kidnapping and attempted murder, and Patrick got 4 years for his role in the kidnapping.
And so, on paper, justice has been served, but then you think about it, 20 years, even for a crime as awful as this, it just doesn't seem like enough when you compare it to the lifetime of trauma that Melina's going to be dealing with. It just begs the question, how can the legal system ever truly address that kind of lasting damage?
It's such a tough question because the sentencing guidelines, they're supposed to provide a framework for justice, but often they just can't capture the true impact of these crimes. And it really underscores the need for, more comprehensive support systems that go beyond punishment and really focus on the long-term needs of survivors.
I totally agree with you there. It's not just about putting the perpetrators behind bars. It's about providing therapy, counseling, and safe spaces for survivors to heal and rebuild.
Yeah, and Melina's story, as we dig into it, gives us such a raw and powerful glimpse into the emotional roller coaster that survivors experience.
Absolutely. She talks about the terror she felt, the prayers she whispered while she was trapped in that box, and how her love for Marcin has completely transformed into this visceral hatred. But what stood out to me? She talks about how the police became like a lifeline for her. They were her support system, her surrogate family in a country where she really had no one else to turn to.
That's so powerful. It makes you realize the importance of having that support system in place, right? People who can offer not just practical help, but that emotional validation and understanding.
For sure. And, this case just highlights for me how dangerous it can be to ignore those early warning signs in relationships. Marcin's obsession with the gym, the steroid use, those personality shifts, they were all red flags. And maybe, just maybe, if someone had addressed them sooner, things could have been different.
It's easy to get caught up in that whirlwind of new love, right? You tend to overlook things, rationalize them away. But we have to remember that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of background or social status.
It really can. Recognizing those signs early on can literally be life-saving, right? It's about trusting your gut instincts, being aware of the patterns of abuse, and seeking help if something doesn't feel right,
You're so right. If there's one takeaway from Melina's experience, it's the power of speaking up.
Yeah.
We have to break the silence around domestic violence.
Absolutely. Because silence only protects the abuser, right? It isolates the victim, makes them feel trapped and alone. Melina's voice, her courage to share her story, it's a powerful weapon against that silence. And it challenges us to be more aware, more empathetic, and more active in supporting survivors.
It really forces us to confront some hard truths, both about ourselves and the society we live in.
So as we move forward in this deep dive, I want you, the listener, to think about what this story means to you, what resonates with you, and most importantly, how can you contribute to creating a world where stories like Melina's become less and less frequent, where victims feel empowered to speak up and seek help, and where abusers are held accountable?
Those are important questions to consider. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we're going to be exploring these questions even further. We'll be looking at the wider societal implications of Melina's story and how we can all work together to prevent these kinds of horrors from happening again.
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot to process, for sure. But, even though it's tragic, Melina's story also has this message of, resilience, right? And the importance of speaking out.
Definitely. It shows that even when things seem really, really dark, there's still that little bit of hope, And for Melina, that hope came from thinking about her son, from the support of the police, and ultimately it came from her own inner strength.
Makes you think, what would have given you that strength to keep going if you were in her situation, trapped like that, after being betrayed like that? Where would you find that, that spark?
It's a question we all should think about, I think.
Huh.
And I mean, obviously, we can't ever really know how we would react in that kind of situation, right? But Melina's story shows us that the human spirit, it's capable of some incredible things. Yeah, it shows that even when you feel totally alone, there's always something to fight for, right? Whether it's the love of a child, or maybe the memory of a happier time, or even just that basic instinct to survive, you know?
Right, exactly. And even when the darkness seems like it's everywhere, there's always a chance to escape, to get your life back and start over.
It's about finding that strength inside you, right? That voice that says, keep going, don't give up.
Exactly. And it's about reaching out for help, too. Knowing that you don't have to go through it alone, that there are people and organizations that want to help survivors.
And speaking of help, Melina's story really shows how important the police were in her recovery. I mean, they became like her safe space, right? Her source of comfort, especially being in a foreign country.
Like, totally.
Yeah.
It really speaks to those officers,
Yeah.
Their compassion and dedication to helping Melina heal and seek justice. It just goes to show that even in the darkest of times, there are good people out there. People who are willing to stand up and help those in need.
Yeah, it reminds you that you don't have to go through tough times by yourself. There's power in asking for help, in telling someone what you're going through and letting yourself be vulnerable,
And I think Melina being willing to share her story, to talk about her pain and how vulnerable she felt, it's really powerful. It challenges how we think about domestic violence, and it lets other survivors know that they're not alone and that they can come forward too,
It's definitely a call to action for all of us to be more aware, to be more empathetic, and to be more proactive in supporting people who are dealing with abuse.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those warning signs, trusting your gut, and stepping in when something seems wrong. We need to create a space where victims feel safe speaking up and where abusers are held accountable.
And at the end of the day, it's about having hope, right? And being resilient. Because even after going through something horrible, there's always a way to heal and move forward.
Melina's story proves that.
Yeah.
The human spirit can overcome anything. It's a story that'll stay with you even after this deep dive.